And welcome to the Six Bridges Book Festival. I'm Michael Heplin. I think you're going to enjoy this session. I'm looking forward to it. We're going to be discussing the book Country Boy, The Roots of Johnny Cash. I'm Michael Heplin, News Director of KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas, and excited to be joined by Dr. Colin Woodward, who is the author of this book. Dr. Woodward, good to talk with you.
Thanks, Michael. Good talking with you.
So where do we begin? Johnny Cash, just an iconic music figure in our history. I guess it's been 19 years since he died, but he continues to have an incredible influence. And this book focuses on his roots in Arkansas. And he often spoke about Arkansas in his music and in interviews. But why don't we begin? First, tell me how you came to delve into this topic for a book.
Sure. Well, I think like everybody, I've always liked Johnny Cash. I think it's just kind of a matter of degree with him. And yeah, I'm trained as a historian. I've lived in the South for a while. And I got a job in Arkansas back in 2012. And I was kind of close to finishing up work on my first book, which was on the Civil War. And I wanted to do something kind of ambitious, something new. And when I was there, pretty early on, I was finding some really interesting material on Johnny Cash that we had in the archive, because I was working at University of Arkansas, Little Rock. They had some really great collections there. And, you know, I was new to Little Rock and new to Arkansas. I knew a little bit about Johnny Cash. I think like a lot of people, I had seen Walk the Line and I liked it. And I think I'd read his first autobiography because it's mentioned in the movie High Fidelity. But that was a good book. And I liked his music. I hadn't listened to a lot of it. But when I was in Little Rock and working in the archive, there was this big collection. They still have it, but I was working on it a lot when I was there. The Winthrop Rockefeller papers, and John Kirk, who I'm sure you know, he just wrote a book on Winthrop Rockefeller, and he was governor of Arkansas in the 60s, and Johnny Cash played some concerts for him. And the first kind of connection I made with him in Arkansas while I was in Arkansas was a picture of him at Cummins Prison Farm in 1969. At the time, I didn't know where it was taken, when it was taken. It was just this picture of Johnny Cash. And after doing some research, I kind of just started going down these rabbit holes, first with the concerts for Rockefeller and the prison concert he does at Cummins, and these other concerts that he did for Rockefeller in 68. So the project just kind of kept snowballing. And luckily, we had some really great primary source material in the archives at UALR that was photographs, audio, a lot of newspaper articles. There's some letters back and forth between Rockefeller and Cash. So it was really cool to kind of find all this unfound material that was really kind of a gold mine. And so I started with the prison reform and the Rockefeller angle, but then it snowballed into these other aspects. At the time, they were working on opening up the house and dais. So I was there at a very cool time for ASU and Johnny Cash fans. They were renovating his house that opened in 2014. So I was there for that. So it was just kind of good timing that there were other things going on. They also opened the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville around that time. So I don't know. It's just one of those things. I think like a lot of books, you start out focusing on one topic, and then you just keep finding more and more interesting things. And after a year or so, I figured, well, I think this would be an interesting book. And I didn't know if I had enough material necessarily to stretch it out into a book. But I just kept plodding ahead and used a variety of sources. And there were a lot of great things in Little Rock, not just at Euler, but also at Cal's. So being in Arkansas was very important to this project. I don't think I could have done it to the extent that I did without being there. So it was kind of great to have access to all these other all these materials, all these locations, going down to Kingsland, going up to Dias. So it just kind of became a full immersion experience. But obviously, as you go in, you have to keep listening to the music, there's so much of. So it was really kind of for lack of a better word, kind of a multimedia experience. Just the music, the photographs, the books, the whatever, the primary source material. And it took me a long time, longer than I thought, but after a while, just kind of said, I'm going to sit down, just finish this thing. And luckily, I just, was able to stay interested in it and find some really interesting sources. And so that it wound up being the book that it is.
Yeah. And you and I guess we're both, I reported on a lot of the efforts to restore the Cash home, the family house, the farmhouse his family moved into when he was 3. And Roseanne Cash often talks about how her dad said that the family moving into this brand new farmhouse changed his life. They had been living very much in poverty down in Kingsland, where he was born. I'll show a couple of photos here, see if I can share my screen briefly, just to give people an idea of what the house looked like. This was February 26th of 2012. And at that time, the house had been dilapidated for a couple of decades. But at that time, the house had been lifted off the ground because the university needed to replace the gumbo soil underneath. It was an incredible undertaking, but funded through a series of concerts. Then they put the house on the back of a trailer while they laid a concrete foundation, put 6 feet of dirt on top of that. And then a little later in the year, by October, this is what the house looked like on the ground. This was still, while things were still very preliminary, but drastic difference that you can see there. I guess it really, it took a university like ASU, as well as the support of the family, to make such a big project happen. What did you think as you saw this and what began as a series of concerts to restore the home and fund that, as well as Dias? We get into Dias, New Deal colony, not even an original town, created as part of the New Deal from President Roosevelt. So much there to talk about.
Yeah, I think the restoration of the house could really kind of be its own story, its own book, I think. And to a certain degree, I wanted to finish this book. It had taken so long, but also kind of wanted to get it out there, to get a lot of this stuff just sort of in the record, because Arkansas, unfortunately, is a really understudied state. And I didn't know if someone was maybe working on a book on Cash in Arkansas or the restoration. I thought maybe Ruth Hawkins was maybe working on something. So I'm not obsessed with being first, but I kind of wanted to be one of the people to be able to add this part of the story to Cash's life and career, because it really kind of comes full circle in the book. I start out in Kingsland, go into the Dias chapter, and then at the end of the book, you get back into Dias with the restoration effort. And I mean, the pictures you showed there kind of say it all. It was this very dilapidated house. I kind of wish I had been able to see it, or I had thought to see it before they really went in full on to the restoration effort. I just don't think I was that far along in the book yet. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, it was in really sad state. And there's kind of an interesting backstory about them getting the house from someone who was probably asking more money than they should have, but ASU was able to maneuver to get the house back from this owner, because it was in private hands. And I mean, yeah, as you can see, the restoration's magnificent. I mean, Ruth Hawkins and her team of people at ASU, they've done other houses in Arkansas that are just beautiful. You have the Hemingway house up in Piggott. You have Lakeport Plantation down in Lake Village. So this was kind of next on their plate. And I mean, if you just read up on what the family has said about it, it's like a time machine. They've got the piano that the family used that Johnny Cash's mother played. They've got other furniture and things from the time. So it was a very painstaking restoration, and not just on the inside, but also the outside. They, like you said, the gumbo soil, they wanted to make sure that the ground was stable, and they positioned it through global satellites to make sure it was in exactly the right spot. So, they're kind of using the latest technology, but also they wanted to make it look like it's from the 1930s. And I think it does. So they just did an amazing job there. And there have been some things written about Dias, not so much at the book level, but I was able to find some articles and some theses that were written decades ago. So I was able to kind of use that to set the story about Dias during the Great Depression, because that's when Johnny Cash is there. But the restoration itself, yeah, that's a whole nother story. And I've been able to go there twice to see the house. Well, actually 3 times. I've seen the house up close. I went in once, and it's just spectacular. So I think anyone that's interested in Johnny Cash, if you're going to go to Memphis, you definitely got to go to Dice to see that, because it's really unique, and it's out there in the cotton fields, and it doesn't look like necessarily it did when Cash was first there. There would have been a lot more trees in his time period. But the farmers cut those all down to make cotton fields. So the landscape was changing while he was there. So it's changed a lot since he first got there. But I think you get a pretty good indication of what it looked like in the 30s, 40s, and they left in the 50s. But yeah, no, I mean, they just did amazing work there. I can't say enough good about the job they did with the restoration.
Yeah, and even before this, I'd heard stories that people had long been coming from around the world, even when the house was in private ownership and other people lived there, that you'd get these visitors just showing up outside. What was it about, do you think? Yeah, Cash, as said, he spoke about Arkansas all the time, probably more than any other performer I can think of, talking about where they came from. What from your research, why do you think uh, Cash never stopped talking about Arkansas? He moved away at the, what was it, 1950, I think, but he continued to talk about the influence that Arkansas had on him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just the way he was. And it would be interesting to compare his story to a lot of other people, because I think there are certain celebrities where once they make it big, they rarely go back to where they're from, if ever. And I certainly don't think they do quite as much as he did in Arkansas. And it wasn't just Dice, it wasn't just Kingsland, it was kind of the whole state. I mean, when he's playing for Rockefeller in '68, he's going to different locations. He's going out to Winthrop, Arkansas. He's playing in Fayetteville. He plays in Monticello. So he's kind of playing all over, which, he didn't need to do that, but he liked Rockefeller. He was a staunch advocate for prison reform. So, he would keep coming back. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I think, he had a lot of family there, which kept him connected. June is not from Arkansas. June's from Virginia, his second wife, and his first wife is from San Antonio. So he doesn't have immediate family necessarily. After a certain point, his siblings move away. His parents kind of follow him around the country, out to California, and then into Tennessee. So eventually they all kind of relocate to Tennessee, the sisters and brothers and stuff. But I think it just kind of gets back to what the heart of the book is about. Is his roots were in Arkansas. It's where he grew up. It's where he started learning about music, where he started singing. Everything he's hearing on the radio growing up is while he's in Arkansas. So even though it's the Great Depression and there were some family issues with his father that were not good, he still had a lot of love for his home state. And I think he wanted to see, Arkansas improve. Obviously, that's why he plays for Rockefeller. He's an advocate for prison reform. So he knows there are things wrong with his home state, but he has a lot of love for it. He is the country boy. He likes hunting. He likes fishing. So there were a lot of reasons for him to come back. Not just family, but he just likes it there. And he's not that far from Nashville later. I mean, I don't know, about 5 hours or so. So it's not a full day to get out there. So if he wants to get on a tour bus and play a show, he can do that, or he wants to go out and visit family, he can. And when he first gets his start in Memphis, he's very close to Arkansas, as you know. I mean, he just shoot across the river. He can play in Northeast Arkansas. He's playing all those shows. And there was a really great early rock and roll rockabilly scene at that time. So it wasn't just, he liked being outdoors and everything. I mean, initially, that's how his career starts. And even though he plays around the country, he plays around the world, a lot of those early dates are in Arkansas, crisscrossing the state, playing with Elvis, playing with Wanda Jackson, playing with all these great rock and roll people. So it's really kind of every stage in his career, he either has a reason to be in Arkansas, or he kind of goes back, but that connection is still there. And some of it's just sort of a sentimental connection, I guess, to where he grew up, as a lot of us have. But I don't think it was just that. I think he just loved where he grew up. He had a lot of pride in the state. But as I show, when he's not doing great, when he's having drug problems or whatever, he doesn't go back as much. But when he's feeling good and his career is going well, he does come back. So it's not just he loves it, but people in Arkansas love him too. And it's a special kind of fan base that he has there, where they're sort of his people that maybe understand him a little better than other fans do. So it's just kind of this back and forth, I think, between him and his fans. But he was a rooted guy and was a humble guy in a lot of ways. And so he would just go back home and play or visit or whatever. And I think that's probably kind of exceptional for someone of his stature.
Yeah, there was some great footage of him from, I think it was 1968, a documentary, The Man, His World, His Music. I think I'm getting the title right, where he is being followed around, but they drive into Dice. He's actually, driving, I think it was an RV, not a bus, but they drive in there and he walks around the house. And I think at that time it was abandoned or maybe between owners, but walks around and looks in the windows and just kind of seems to have a sense of loss.
Yeah, it's a moving scene, actually. He plays a song. He plays Busted, which I think is kind of appropriate given the state of the house. As you say, it was abandoned, and it's also kind of a Depression era song. And it's just him and his guitar, and he's singing a song there. But yeah, kind of his enthusiasm when he kind of will come off the bus and he'll see someone that he knew in Dice, like they just connect like old friends. And I've seen other pictures of him, just talking to guys through the window of their truck and Dice or whatever. I don't know if they saw Johnny Cash walking around and stopped or whatever, but he always kind of had that connection because he was, from the country, but also he was just kind of blue collar guy that was always touring and really appreciated his fans. So yeah, that documentary is really kind of interesting because there's no narration. It just kind of speaks for itself, these scenes that they set up. But I think it's really one of the better things that he did. It's a great document of who he was in his career, but also that time period, because that's like peak Johnny Cash, like 68. So he's kind of recovered from the worst of his drug problem. And he's just kind of reconnecting with everyone. So going back to Dias and them shooting that footage, it really kind of makes sense. And it really adds to that movie a lot.
Yeah, and then some of that footage was used in the music video for Hurt back in the later part of his career when
Right.
Rick Rubin began producing him. And after his career had been stagnant for a couple of decades, Rick Rubin really introduced him to a new audience. So that's probably some people may know the footage from that.
I kind of
Um,
wonder, sorry, like,
yeah,
I don't wonder if Cash ever thought about buying the old house. I mean,
that's something you would think
yeah,
about.
I never came across that, but it would, I mean, certainly could have afforded it. And yeah, it was between owners at various points. I mean, if he would go back to visit and shoot a video there, why not just buy it?
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe he just had other things to do, or maybe in a way it was almost a little too painful to do that. I mean, he probably wasn't going to live there, so why would he buy it? I mean, he had this big mansion in Nashville, but you would think, maybe that would have crossed his mind. But I've never come across anything that said that he ever thought about it or the family thought about buying it. So that didn't happen. Luckily, ASU steps in later, but maybe he just wanted to move on. I don't know.
Yeah, you talked about how he could connect with people, and that was one of the incredible things about Cash. He had such a presence, but he could talk to anyone. He could talk to governors, he could talk to presidents, performed for Richard Nixon, the stuff I've read about that. And but I think Richard Nixon wanted him to perform Welfare Cadillac, and he politely declined or something. And instead, what did he performed What Is Truth. And
Yeah,
but the presence he had, the way he could talk to anyone and everyone, or the fact that during his prison concerts, that's such a unique thing. And you mentioned him performing at Cummins Prison, but that came after he had the huge hits with Life at Folsom and then San Quentin. What did you take away of just how he could connect with anybody? It seemed.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I get, he had, I think like any celebrity, he would have issues sometimes with people that are getting a little too familiar. Like sometimes people would show up at the house.
Yeah.
There's one story of someone who was in the house once. He just kind of turns around. Oh, there's a fan in here. It's a little creepy. So there was that type of celebrity stuff that they had to deal with. Dealing with security. But no, I mean, you're right. I think just about anybody he could make feel comfortable and connect with. And it seems like every week or so I'll see a picture of him with somebody that I've never seen before. And just after the Queen died, I think I saw a picture of his Cash and Prince Charles, maybe. I don't know if I saw him with the Queen, but certainly, yeah. I mean, he could talk to royalty. He could talk to your youngest fan, every type of fan that there was. No, he's just, I don't know. He had that gift for, I think, making people feel at ease, and was just himself. He had, a lot of people they want to be authentic. I think Cash is a pretty authentic guy to a degree. So yeah, no, I mean, he could play for prisoners, which I think most of us would be pretty scared to do. That's kind of a tough audience, but he said it was his best audience.
Yeah,
And
they loved him. They
they
just
did. Well, a lot of people thought he had done time.
one of the
And
misconceptions.
right. And Cash talked about that later. He said, never actually had been in prison, been in jail a few times, but he kind of looked like a prisoner. And at certain points, he has the scar on his cheek, and he's a big kind of imposing guy. So he had this sort of presence, but he was also a very kind of soft-spoken guy in a lot of ways. So depending on the occasion, he can kind of dial it down. But obviously, when he plays these shows, he has to be up. And if you're playing in front of prisoners, I think you really got to be on. And they're gonna suss it out if you're not the real deal, I think. But I think from the beginning of the first show he played was in Texas, went pretty well, and they went well again and again. And as you say, I mean, the Folsom concert was huge. San Quentin, they become the live albums that really send him into the stratosphere. So they're always a good audience for him. Eventually he stopped. I think the audience kind of started to change around 1980. So he didn't like doing them anymore. I'm not fully sure why he did stop. I think again, it was one of those things he figured I've done enough of these, and maybe it was getting a little too dangerous at times. But yeah, for a long time, he loved playing for prisoners, and some of his most memorable concerts, and certainly the one at Cummins was one of the most memorable. The only time he played for Arkansas prisoners.
Yeah, and the great thing about the Cummins show is the KATV Channel 7 here in Little Rock sent a crew down and recorded much of it, and it has been preserved by the Pryor Center up at the University of Arkansas, and can be viewed online at the Pryor Center's website. So it's been a great treat having, this kind of, sources really come out in later years and be available, for so long now, after almost 2 decades after his death. Tell me a little more about any other sources or maybe any surprises, anything as you worked on this book.
Yeah, the sources were a little tricky at times because I'm trained as a historian who does archival research. When I was at LSU, all my professors, they had written books that use a lot of archival research. So you go to, Chapel Hill or Duke or wherever, and just get your hands dirty looking at manuscript collections and everything. Problem with Cash is there's really not a lot of that kind of material. I mean, there were some things at UALR that I found, but not a lot from Cash himself in terms of writing. I mean, we have his books, we have his memoirs, there've been a ton of biographies written about him, but you can't go to Memphis or Nashville and find like the Johnny Cash papers or the Cash family papers. It's kind of things that are scattered either in libraries that, kind of sources anyone could access. There are things like the Pryor Center, you can get video, rare audio at some places, but this is a different kind of experience for me as a historian, because usually you sit down and you read all day, but this was listening to music, looking at photographs, reading his books, reading newspaper articles. And as great as Cash was, there was a lot of stuff you got to either take it with a grain of salt or maybe not really believe that it's 100% accurate. Robert Hilburn, one of his biographers, said this when I saw him talk in Little Rock. It's kind of an instance where Cash wouldn't let facts get in the way of a good story. So some of these myths are kind of his own making and would get repeated. So, I don't want to be that annoying historian who's like, well, this didn't happen, that didn't happen. I mean, a certain amount of that is good, but you don't want to just start being a contrarian to everything. And some things you just have to take his word for it. But other things, I think you do have to have a healthy amount of skepticism, because it could, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter, some of these stories, but you kind of want to set the record straight as a historian. You don't want things that are not factual, obviously, but if there's something that's a little dubious, I think you need to talk about that. So I do talk about that in some of the books, in the book, but it was a good topic in a lot of ways, because now with the internet, you can find so many things online, like a lot of archives, like the Pryor Center, they put things up, but also YouTube is just fantastic. And so I think initially I saw the Cummins footage on YouTube. Someone put it up. I don't know who. So you can find a lot of interviews, a lot of concert footage, usually nothing really related to Arkansas. So sometimes it was helpful, sometimes so much not. But I didn't want to necessarily just take his word for it with certain stories. So there's some in there that I kind of try to knock down a bit, cast some doubt on it. But no, I mean, there were a lot of surprises with this. And we talked about this the other day, but I think one thing that was surprising to me that came out really late in my research, because there was a TV show about it, but it was about Johnny Cash's first wife, Vivian Liberto, having some African American ancestry. And this was something that was, it was a scandal in the mid 60s, because some white supremacists saw a picture of Cash's wife and they assumed she was African American. And she denied it, the family denied it, Cash denied everything. And I didn't really put any credence in that, because I thought it was just a rumor. But then Henry Gates, on his show, he had Roseanne Cash, and she did a DNA ancestry test, and turned out that her mother did have some African American ancestry going back to the antebellum period. So that was surprising to me, and something that we couldn't have proved without the DNA evidence, which happens sometimes. And I mean, I think with that whole question of, what did Cash know? What did his wife know at the time? Maybe we don't know much more than we would have in the mid 60s, but it was at least established that she did have some African American ancestry. And I mean, she's also Sicilian, has Italian ancestry. So I think a lot of her quote unquote ethnic look was that, and was misinterpreted at the time. But for this DNA evidence to come out was kind of surprising to me, because I just figured, it was a rumor, and the people at the time, their agenda was to tear Cash down by calling his wife African American. So it was a pretty ugly thing that Cash didn't like to talk about later. But it's one of those things that couldn't get proven until the 21st century with the DNA evidence. So that was a kind of a last minute surprise to me. I talked about that with some historians before, but it was really that TV show that kind of put it all out there. And Roseanne herself was surprised. Interestingly, they didn't talk about any Native American ancestry that Cash talked about for years and years, and later said that he didn't have any Native American ancestry. But I was kind of hoping on that show that they at least addressed that, but they didn't. But it appeared from the DNA that there was no Native American ancestry at all.
Yeah.
Cash.
But the Ken Burns series on country music delved into that quite a bit. The suggestion of Cash and his wife and being African American, and it sounded really harsh. I don't remember the exact words, but some Klan leaders saying, married to a black woman and these mongrel children, and it's just very stark. But you mentioned, you see new photos regularly come out, and one of my favorite things to look at on Twitter every day, the Johnny Cash estate has the at Johnny Cash handle, and they almost daily, I guess, put out new photos here and there, some familiar, but some not so familiar. I'll also add, I went to the new Bob Dylan Museum in Tulsa a couple of months ago, and was surprised by how much Johnny Cash material was in there. He and Bob Dylan had met, but assorted artifacts. But one of the most striking things was a handwritten note that Johnny Cash gave to Bob Dylan after they met, and it just Johnny Cash, my phone number, here's my address. And they would go on to record some together, and there's a great compilation or collection of things that were originally bootleg recordings. But it's interesting, the friendships that Cash made over the years, and people who he would end up working with on projects, people it seemed like would be a contradiction to, a country music performer.
Yeah, I just wrote an article about Dylan and Cash. Actually, I haven't been able to get out to Tulsa to see that. I've heard a lot of good things about it, and it's getting a lot of great buzz. And it sounds kind of like Dylan was the sort of guy who never threw anything away, which
Yeah,
is great
totally.
for archivists. But yeah, I think there was a lot of crossover with them. I mean, just given their background, I know Dylan is from the upper Midwest, but he's from a small town that's in a way kind of as harsh as Dias was, and if you know, cold versus heat. But small town guy, listening to records growing up just the way Cash did. And they're, I think, 12 years apart. So that is quite a bit of time, but they sort of converge in the 60s. I mean, Dylan is getting famous in the folk movement in New York City, and Cash at that time, he's pretty established, but he's in his bad drug phase, and he's kind of looking for a new sound. And so they become friends hanging out in New York, and they do eventually collaborate. But I think, Cash, like a lot of people, he just got obsessed with Dylan. I mean, Dylan definitely acknowledges debt to Cash with songs like Big River and a lot of the early Sun stuff. But yeah, I mean, initially you kind of think there's really nothing, or there's not a lot in common there, because lyrically they're so different. Just in kinds of their personality, they're very different. I mean, Dylan's kind of more of a shy, introverted type of guy. But Dylan's the first guy to appear on Cash's TV show. So they're friends, they're collaborators. They work together on Nashville Skyline, which is really Dylan's first fully fledged country album. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me there's a lot of stuff in Tulsa, and I think it's just amazing. There's still music coming out. Like, they'll still find these archival duets, collaborations, whatever. I mean, Cash has so much material, and there's so much that's come out after he's died. I'm sure, Dylan's still going to be putting out until he's not around anymore. But then once he is, once he's gone, there's going to be more music. It's just going to take a long time for it to all play out. But no, the Tulsa archive is really exciting because, like I said, usually you don't have kind of one-stop shopping for a lot of these guys. So if you can go to Tulsa, and obviously if you're a Dylan scholar, you want to go there. But if he's got stuff about Cash, he's got stuff about Tom Petty or George Harrison. I mean, the list will probably just go on and on with that. But I'm guessing like a lot of it's kind of more visual right now with the museum. They want to show you things, but there's probably just a lot of paper and behind the scenes that scholars will be able to archive. So yeah, I mean, that's going to be great for people, and hopefully I'll get out there one day to check it out, because I think Tulsa's kind of, it's got its own thing going on right now, kind of a great art scene and a cool music scene. So it's kind of interesting that Dylan decided. I'm not sure exactly why because it's the Woody Guthrie connection. Is that why it's there?
Yeah, it's right next to. In fact, it's in the same building. And of course, Bob Dylan, idolized Woody Guthrie, but I forget the whole specifics of how Dylan's museum ended up there.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys too. Like, if you can make the case for it to be in Tulsa and Woody Guthrie's stuff is already there, he'll do it. Like, he's not necessarily gonna give it to Nashville or give it to someplace in Minnesota. He's just kind of an eccentric guy, and it's great that he's made that contribution, because it's really kind of putting Tulsa on the map for this archive of country music and folk music.
Yeah.
Can't be all about Nashville.
Yeah.
Or Memphis.
And Memphis. And talk about recordings coming out there. I guess it was a decade or so ago when recordings from when Cash did a short-lived radio show at a West Memphis station, KWEM, I think. And the recordings of that, I think he was still like selling appliances by day while he, made this was sort of like his first foray into some kind of entertainment.
Yeah, the world's worst appliance salesman, I think is what the consensus is. Cash should just kind of talk himself out of selling it to you for whatever reason. But he's trying to pay the bills and needed to do something before he could make music. But yeah, he got it. He did some shows in West Memphis. His oldest brother was there in Memphis before he was, and he was a little bit of a musician. So he kind of played before Cash got there. But yeah, Cash, like anybody starting out, you do whatever you can. You'll talk to anybody, play any gig. But if you get it's on one of the bootleg collections of Cash. Yeah, it has that West Memphis performances on there. So it's kind of funny to listen to really early on.
Yeah, including the live commercials for
right. Yeah, Cash having to sell whatever, like he already hated selling appliances, but so he had to do that to play. But he put up with it, and played a lot of small gigs as you do, and outside of Memphis and Northeast Arkansas. But altogether, he's not really. Some people now they might pay their dues for 10 or 15 years before they get signed or they get known at all. I mean, with him, we're talking a year, before he's selling huge records. So, he did play those tiny gigs and stuff, but luckily for him, it didn't take that long.
Yeah, we've talked a little about he and politicians, and I know this isn't specifically in your work, but just wanted to get kind of feedback. Here in Arkansas, the state legislature in 2019, at the urging of Governor Asa Hutchinson, the legislature passed a bill to replace its two statues in the U.S. Capitol. The ones that are there now, Uriah Rose, former attorney who started the Rose Law Firm, and former Governor and Senator James P. Clark. Hutchinson talked about how the historical figures Arkansas had on display there. He would personally take people there to Statuary Hall, and the people, there would be no connection. Here's some guy from the 1870s, and but to his credit, Governor Hutchinson really pressed the legislature in favor of replacing the two statues, and he urged Johnny Cash and Daisy Bates, the Little Rock civil rights activist, mentor for the Little Rock Nine, both social activists, really, but the Republican governor, who's now considering a run for president, and a Republican-controlled legislature agreed to this. And right now, I'll see if I can show my screen. I actually, in advance for our event here, I have interviewed the sculptor working on the Cash statue, Kevin Cressy, several times since first covering the hearing where committee selected him to make the statue. But I just wanted to share this with our viewers because I interviewed him and I aired this yesterday afternoon. I'll have that audio up on KUAR's website this evening. But let me show just a few images of this because the detail, and it's really striking. He has been working on this for about 14 months. The face, that's KUAR's Flap Jones, host of Not Necessarily Nashville, actually getting to touch it. This is just the clay model that a foundry will use to actually cast the bronze statue. But part of his presentation, he talked about Kevin did the importance of faith for Johnny Cash. So that's why we've got a Bible in his hand, a guitar strung around his back. And here, the boots, and he wanted the detail, the floor that he was standing on, to be the boyhood home, the front porch of the home in Dias. And at this point, it's on track to be completed. He said he has finished. Now, the clay model, his work on it, said he needs it just to be taken away. Otherwise, he'll keep meticulously, obsessing
Right.
over it. But he's ready, and now it's, being submitted paperwork to for U.S. Capitol's architect to approve before the statue, the bronze statue, is cast. And the governor had hoped this would be completed by the end of his term. It's now looking more like it'll be sometime next year, March, April or so. But how is it, do you think, that Johnny Cash has managed to, for politicians, I guess this gets back to his strong personality, but even politicians on extreme sides all find something that they connect with about Johnny Cash and somehow manage to kind of appropriate as their own?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot written more recently, more than I have, about his politics, but he was kind of one of those guys. He, to use a bad pun, he kind of walked the line between the left and the right.
Yeah.
There's some things that are very kind of progressive about him, and things that are you would consider more conservative. But I think he's coming out of a time period where there was way more bipartisanship than there is now. I mean, it's virtually impossible to get agreement on anything in the way that there used to be. So he's raised in a time period where, during the Depression, I mean, the South, at least the white South, is overwhelmingly Democratic. But by the 60s, you're getting kind of this blending of Cold War politics, Cold War liberalism, and everything, where people who are running for president, like Nixon and Kennedy, they're both Christians. It's just a matter of what type of Christian they are, how big government they are about certain things. They're both anti-communist. So there's not a lot of hard divisions in ideology. I think this changes as the 60s goes on. The country does get more divided. To go back to 1968, which is a really pivotal year, you have, all these huge things happening with assassinations and riots, and the presidential election is such a big deal. So certainly he lived in tumultuous times like we have the last few years. But yeah, I mean, I think Cash is one of those people where he's not an ideological guy. He said he never voted. So we have to take his sort of politics with a bit of a grain of salt, because if you can't even vote, you kind of how committed are you to certain issues? But certainly he had his issues. There's no doubt about that. Native Americans, prison reform, all those things. And his TV show was really good for that, because you can kind of bring on all kinds of people that you wanted,
Yeah.
a wide spectrum. But if you're looking at Arkansas, and to get back to the issue of the statue, I mean, again, he's one of those people I think everybody can agree on. And whether you're a Republican or Democratic governor, think of the last few governors. A lot of them have been musicians. Mike Huckabee was a musician. Bill Clinton was a musician. Mike Beebe was a guitar player, I think. So they all kind of love music. They all love Johnny Cash. So it didn't surprise me that he was chosen. I mean, he seems like a natural choice. Someone who obviously everyone in Arkansas would like, I think, but also nationally. I mean, he's going to be one of the people, I think, one of the statues people are going to take their picture with, regardless if they're from Arkansas or Virginia or Massachusetts, and they're going to want to see the Johnny Cash statue once it's finally there.
And the first musician to be in Statuary Hall. So,
and I don't know how often they get changed. I mean, obviously Arkansas hadn't been changed for a long time, but I think they made two great choices there.
What do you think Johnny Cash would have thought of about a statue of him being placed in the Capitol representing Arkansas, as well as Arkansas State University preserving his home?
I think he would definitely love the home being restored. I think the Cash family's been very involved, and Roseanne's been there a bunch of times. John Carter Cash has been out there. Joanne, Tommy, the remaining siblings have been out there, and his Johnny's kids have been there too. So I think he'd think it's great. I think he'd love it. I think if he could, he'd probably be playing shows there every year, the way Roseanne has. I think he would probably be pretty humble about the statue. Probably he'd say something, there's probably other deserving people, that it didn't have to be me, but I think he probably would be there when it's unveiled, or he would be there, to take pictures or whatever. I think he would probably reluctantly enjoy seeing it happen, but I think there would be a little bit of pushback from him, just because he was kind of a humble guy. And again, not political, but in kind of his own way. So maybe he would think, well, why are you doing a statue of me there? Maybe you should have a statue of me in Memphis or Little Rock or something like that. But I think he'd be okay with it.
All right, I'll take a question here, and I haven't really mentioned that often enough. Those joining us via the Zoom link can ask questions, but in the 9 minutes we have left, are there any songs that strongly reflect an Arkansas influence?
Well, I mean, some of them that he would, he wrote for special occasions, like the "When I Get Out of Cummins" song that he wrote for the Cummins show in 1969. Again, he's coming off of the Folsom concert, the San Quentin concert, so he wrote that song just especially for the prisoners at Cummins, and it has a very strong political take in it. So that's one that I came across that I don't think, if you listen to the live footage of the concert, you can hear it, but he didn't ever record it. But there's one he did when he did his show in 1976 in Cleveland County. He wrote a song for that, "Riding on the Cotton Belt" by his dad.
I actually played that song at the end of the interview I aired yesterday.
Okay.
Just because it felt appropriate, and it's one of those lesser known songs. But yeah, he introduces it saying that he wrote this kind of from the perspective of his father, back when his father used to kind of run around, kind of a hobo on trains and try to make money, then come back to his family.
Right. And that was one of the things that was a little tricky about writing about certain songs, because it might not be overtly about Arkansas, it might not say anything about Arkansas, but it's clearly about Dias or Kingsland or his experiences there. So, something like 5 Feet High and Rising.
Yeah.
Definitely about Dias. He doesn't talk about Arkansas specifically, but it's about the flood in 37 and his experiences there. And
and there is a great live version at Madison Square Garden when he kind of, as he's going into the song, he tells the story of, I'm from Arkansas, and talks about the flood, and then talks about the levee breaks at Wilson, Arkansas, and he saw the black, muddy Mississippi water rise up, and then dring. And I heard my daddy ask my mama, dring, how high is the water, mama?
Yeah, we did an exhibit on Cash in Little Rock back in 2014, and we had some audio footage of 5 Feet High and Rising. And if you kind of pass by the sensor, the song would play. So the people in Cal's got to hear that song about 10,000 times over the course of the exhibit, because people kept walking past. But I mean, it's definitely one of his best songs, and certainly one of the best ones that he wrote about Arkansas specifically, although didn't mention Arkansas. But something like "Pickin' Time" about life in the cotton fields, that's another one. I mean, the song "Country Boy" is obviously about him growing up in Arkansas. But they kind of follow all the way to the end of his career. He keeps doing these songs that are Arkansas based in some way. And even Rock Island Line, which is one of my favorites, that has an
Yeah.
Arkansas connection too. He didn't write that one, but his
Right.
interpretation of it is unique and very Johnny Cash. So there are quite a few throughout his career that are definitely based on Arkansas.
Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of questions here. You have a lot of really good, rich details in your book. Anything you would like to add that I haven't asked about?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I in a way, like, Johnny Cash is still kind of underappreciated, as same famous as he is. Like, yeah, I listen to XM radio a lot, and there's an Elvis channel, there's a Tom Petty channel, there's a Beatles channel. Like, why isn't there a Johnny Cash channel? I mean, there's so much music, and that was one of the challenges to writing the book, was like, there's so much. I mean, there's so many albums. There's a lot of, quote unquote, bootleg material that's come out. But I mean, he was just a machine. And, some years he'd do 2, 3 albums sometimes. So there's a lot there. And as much as people love the Sun period, the early stuff in Memphis, and a lot of people like the later Rick Rubin American recording stuff, there's a lot in between that's really good. And I'm not talking about Folsom and San Quentin, but I think the Children's album from the mid 70s is underappreciated. I mean, that's a really fun, sweet album that he does. His son is about 5 or 6, I think, when that comes out. So it's just kind of a fun record that doesn't get the attention of other things. So I think with Cash, it's like, there's the Man in Black, there's the darkness and all that, and all his drug problems and destruction of hotels and everything. But there's also this family man, this funny guy, this goofball, practical joker and stuff. So you always kind of want to balance those two things with him. And, if you do like Cash, try to hit stuff from every period, because just about every record, there's at least 1 or 2 good songs. He has trouble in the 80s, but the Highwayman stuff is good. There's some great stuff he does in the early 80s. So you just gotta have, you gotta listen to all of it, I think. So hopefully there'll just be more music coming out in the future, and it just, you never feel like you've heard it all, as much as you can maybe hear. But I'd love to see a Johnny Cash station. I love that. And not just the music, but people talking about him too would be really great.
Yeah, it's his influence on people. A lot of artists talk about him, but still, I don't think his influence can be overstated. Well,
Yeah.
it sounds like a good point to wrap up on. So, thank you very much, Colin Edward Woodward. His book is Country Boy: The Roots of Johnny Cash. I did mention your background, PhD in history from Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, worked here at UA Little Rock for quite a while. This has been a great hour talking about one of my favorite topics. So thanks so much for joining me.
All right, thanks, Mom. Just hold up the book real quick. It's reversed, but you get it. University of Arkansas Press, going for about $24 in paperback. So thanks, Michael. It's great talking with you and talking about Arkansas again. I really appreciate it.
And people can buy a copy of the book. We've got it on line, and you can, that will also help support the books, courtesy of Woodworth Books. So thanks to the Six Bridges Book Festival for putting this amazing festival together every year. And thanks to everyone watching. We really do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Michael. And thank you, everyone who tuned in.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.